I'm excited to be here and to partner with Thinky Games and to talk about stuff that I'm a total nerd for. Um, okay, the title of this is a mouthful: Mathy Thinky Puzzly Problem Solving. Today's most important skill. This is a fairly ambitious um, presentation I put together. Should be fun. I'm gonna kind of, I'll talk about myself a little bit. I'll get into kind of making my case. Um, but I also want to look at some games. I think, I don't want to have a totally dry academic uh, presentation. Let's actually play some games too. And I'll try to, and basically we'll get into the games and I'll start making connections to the kind of case that I made. So you can look me up. I don't want to talk too much about it. I'm a little bit less of the game profile and more on the education ed tech software game-based learning side of things. I've been in that field for quite some time, mostly in the math space, spent a lot of time in the language space as well. Even working at a company like Epic, not the game one, but the kids reading app, but kids think of it as a game, and that we were able to kind of gamify the reading experience and get lots of millions of kids to read. And so that's been more my shtick. When I think about what gets me excited for games in general, it's definitely in the thinky category. I mean, there's fun kind of other types of games, but I'm specifically really interested in kind of these kinds of the thinky kind of games that are really pushing kids to not only think, but I do have a math lens on it again as right now as well. So that's where the mathy part is. Okay, here's the case. And I'll open with the question: what are the skills that it really takes to be successful today or tomorrow or in 5 years from now? I mean, things are moving so fast, faster, just exponentially faster. And I know this is a super wide open, loaded question. I mean, even define success, but I certainly have, as an educator, as a parent, my thoughts. I figured I'd go to the World Economic Forum for this. And I even cut out the bottom five and just focusing in on the top five, or sorry, the 5 out of 10, focusing in on the top five, analytical thinking, creative thinking, resilience, or as we call it, grit, I think, in the workplace, flexible thinking. I think flexibility and agility, I would kind of tease those out. Motivation and self-awareness. Self-awareness is a really tricky one. I might put that aside, but I think the motivation piece is then tied to curiosity. And I think we've known that these are really the things that drive success, for lack of a better word, for a long time. And it's frustrating to have been in the education scene and to know that, like, this is not really the things that we focus on that much. If you look at what standards we have to teach in school, yeah, there's a lot of, even like the math practice standards versus all the, there's some space for this. And I think there are a lot of people that care deeply about this. But even, like, how do we treat the arts and fund that? And how do we, this is just not I don't expect every person to come through formal schooling and be excellent at all of these things. And if they are excellent at them, it's not necessarily from their schooling. And so how are they getting this experience? Obviously life, but are there other ways that you can train for these behaviors? All right, so I'm going to switch from World Economic Forum to kind of the play math lens, the play math marketing lens here, right? And I'll throw out, we also live in a world right now where our attention span is under attack. The way I talk about it for my kids who are 4 and 6, there are trillions of dollars of investment made to brain hack you via a screen and via short form content and the interaction and all of that. And we're just not powerful enough to go up against that. It does impact us. And you can, there's plenty of research that's out there. I think more research will come in over time for sure when we really try to get into it, but it's very complicated. But But it begs the question, like, okay, well, what can we at least do to, like, sure, if with my kids, I can be like, no screen time during the week. But like, what else can we do knowing that this is the world we live in? What can we do to stretch out our attention span and try to undo some of the damage that's being done to us? I, Chat GPT brain is kind of the other angle that I think is relevant. MIT's study was really the first one that kind of talked about cognitive debt, at least kind of widespread. And there are definitely two sides to AI, and I have a second half to this, but even within how are you using AI, you can use it to try to do everything and to not think. You can also use it to really like explore and experiment and sharpen your idea. There's kind of different ways to use it, but I think everyone who's used it does have the sense that, like, okay, I can see how this could, like a calculator for some level of mathematic skills, arithmetic that might have been more pertinent then, or like GPSs, like this thing. I mean, writing is definitely something that's top of mind, I know, for a lot of educators. But there is another side to the power of having artificial intelligence in your pocket, and how can we combat against that? And at the same time, this is the flip side, is as we prepare to live in a world where we do have GPT-10 in our pocket, what do I want to be good at? Like, what is my role? What do I need to be smart? What does my brain need to be trained for? Martin Gardner, who is one of the kind of first recreational mathematicians, has this wonderful quote, and I'm going to actually read it. Evolution has developed the brain's ability to solve puzzles, and at the same time has produced in our brain a pleasure of solving problems. And again, I think this is one of those things that we all fundamentally know that we get. I'll use the term dopamine loosely, but like, the sense of satisfaction. And, we are wired to solve problems. Okay, so let's look at some games. I'm going to just flip over and I'm going to call out Snakebird Math, which is a really cool collab that we did with Nonaman Games. And I just want to, we collabed with them to make it a little bit more mathy and bring in some different elements. This is the first puzzle, which is just, okay, what am I doing here? And this is like with every new game that you've never seen, like, okay, take a minute to take in the cuteness of all of this. Okay, so I see here, okay, then this unlocked, like, what's going on? Okay, cool. And the first puzzle, the first question, there's always this, like, you want to kind of indoctrinate them into the world, onboard them. And I'm not going to spend the hours that it would take me to play through all of this. But I'm just going to bounce around to a couple of different islands so you can see kind of, okay, what does some level progression look like? Okay, now I'm trying to get to that 8 again, and I can see I'm too long. And what are I guess I could just start messing around, which is what a lot of kids will do. And I ate all of the fruit. And so, obviously I know how to play this game, but I want to call out this moment of exploring and just kind of trying out something. And like, okay, I can see, like, I made a problem. And so now I understand a little bit better of what's going on. Like, this is the human brain loop that's what learning is, where you're kind of trying something out, making a prediction, taking in the feedback, adjusting your strategy, trying something new. Like, that is kind of one of the most important skills that ties almost all of this other stuff together. And one of the cool things about really good leveling is you get people into this, like, strategy that they have, and then you hit them with something new and you break that strategy, and then you're like, well, what? And so even something simple as a new game mechanic that didn't exist before, and you're like, okay, well, now how does this fit in? I have to figure out the rules for this thing, and how does it fit in with my pre-existing strategy? Um, so as much as I want to just keep playing this game, I'm going to bring it back, and I want to talk about that. So I was pointing out like kind of the tutorial puzzle, and then the a couple of new game mechanics, and a couple. I skipped like 10, 20 levels. Um, and so I found this chart. I am kind of a graph nerd. I did find this not this lo-fi chart on the internet, and there's a couple of different interesting things that it's trying to say. I'd hone in on this guy where it's kind of difficulty over time, and this is like, okay, so what this is implying is you have this kind of like easy onboarding, and then like, okay, the game starts to ramp up and it starts to get harder and harder and harder, and then it kind of like plateaus, and maybe there's just like a ceiling of difficulty that you even want to get to in this game. Maybe that's just kind of where you got to is the game mechanics, and it's interesting enough, and you can just make that the game for the second half of the game with great story. And so I'm showing this first because I also made a graph, and mine also doesn't look nice. But I want to call out. Okay, so I think there's this moment in almost every game where you're kind of you come in, you're playing. The red line is your frustration, or maybe difficult, like a difficulty meter. And then again, I'm using the term dopamine lightly here. I think sense of accomplishment and kind of sense of joy, and but you kind of get your little dopamine hits from overcoming your frustration, right? Like it's kind of small early on. You're like, how do I do? Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, this is cool. And then like, okay. And then you get to that moment where you're like, I am stuck on this thing. And this can go a number of ways. So maybe you put it down, maybe you come back to it, maybe you push through it. But and this is not an exact chart, right? I free drew this, but I think this goes to illustrate the points that these things are tied together. And I'm not even talking about like learning or growth yet, which also is kind of the important piece. But like this is the we're wired to do this piece, right? Like this is that joyful moment from overcoming the frustration, and then your frustration goes down, and you kind of keep going. And what I'm not saying is that everything needs to be super crazy difficult. But I am saying that I don't think everything should be easy. Like, I don't think we should have thinking calculators in our pockets that do all of the hard thinking for us. Like, I don't think that's what we're wired for. I don't think we'll be joyful. I don't think it's the right use of technology. All right, so I'm gonna switch over to another game, which you may or might not know. This Boo from Bart Bonte, another wonderful game. It's very thinky. And, this game is so cute and just so approachable. And, we did kind of push it a little bit during Halloween. It's very themey. And, you could even just kind of come in here and like play around and see what's going on, coming back to this like experiential learning, like, oh, okay, cool. And what if I do? Oh, okay. And so, this game starts again. I don't want to play through, too many minutes of it, but you start introducing more pieces, and there's a mask and there's an eye patch, and it starts getting really hard in terms of like, okay, I need to make this shape, and so how am I going to use these in a way that makes the right paint? And it's funny. So this game, absolutely wonderful. And I'm going to use this as an example where to kind of hone in on the level of difficulty. And so when we first got this game on our platform, I got some feedback from some adults that were like, oh, this game is like amazing. It gets so hard so fast, and like it's so great, and it's like, it's fun and all that stuff. And I was like, okay, that's funny, because I am getting, playmat is primarily geared towards, elementary and, schools. And so we need to have stuff that is accessible for younger kids as well. And there is a lot of overlap in like what's good for kids and what's good for adults. But I'll say that the initial, coming back to the graph stuff, the initial, I'd say this is what it was initially, where like you had a tutorial puzzle, and then you had like one more version of that, and then there were like a bunch of new game mechanics and like multi-step and whatever. And it's like the kids like just could not make this leap. Right. And so what we did was we worked together to come up with like, okay, well, what do we think is like the right ramp for kids, or maybe even just, kind of more casual thinky type people. And, we're able to kind of smooth that out, basically just, kind of stretched out that first onboarding path, and, get to the same place, but, it's kind of a longer experience now. So there's a little bit of a lower ceiling for I think people who can kind of get into this game quickly, especially since it was like within the first couple of puzzles. And to be clear, it's like no slate to, I think it's really just, we wanted this game for a different audience, and it's not like it was the wrong leveling in the first place. But I'm going to use that as an example. This is kind of one of my punchline slides here, which is that I want to bridge the world of game culture, like level design and how to ramp up your mechanics in the proper difficulty curve, and the world of education, and using that framework to think about like, where do we want our brains to be generally, right? And I will start by saying that it is not in the mindless fun or boring parts. I think we all agree with that, but I think that we do end up spending a lot of time in mindless fun. And I'm certainly guilty of it as well. And I think there is a place for that. But where we really want to be pushing ourselves is, I like this term, hardcore fun. There's definitely stuff that's too hard. And you couldn't do it by yourself. And you might not even be able to do it if you had a really experienced other person next to you, like it's the older brother on the Mario level, and like even he can't like teach me the kid how to do it, kind of a thing. But I think generally speaking, a lot of people really enjoy this space, right? And it goes back to all of the things that we've been talking about what our brains are designed to do. And this is a kind of a gaming vernacular. And what we say in education is we talk about your zone of proximal development, which I heard ZPD a million times in my career. I'm not sure how much it gets talked about in the gaming world, but it's essentially the same concept in terms of meeting you right at that edge of like, you don't want to be too boring and too easy and too mindless. And you don't want it to be so hard that like, it's just not even fun, or like not even achievable, not even possible. Right. But you're in that sweet spot of like, I can feel that like I'm pushing on my brain. And that's where we want kids. That's where we want adults. That's where we want our seniors. Like our brains are the most amazing and powerful organ in our body. And it's kind of under attack, as I mentioned. And so all that to say, I'll leave some time for some questions, and we could look at some more games too, but it's funny, Joe, I don't know if this maybe works for Thinky games. So I have not trademarked this, but you want to play these games to train your mind, not just your fingers. Like the Flappy Bird was a fun moment in time, and it's a fun kind of a game. And there's lots of different kinds of games that are dexterity based and timing and luck and all of that. But the more that you can play Thinky games, which are just naturally fun already, the healthier you're going to be, the more successful you're going to be. Like I've made my case, I probably can't like prove it to the level that I want to, but that is my thesis, that Thinky, Mathy, Puzzly games and getting good at solving those puzzles, which are metaphorical problems, is the single most important thing that we all need to be doing.
Thank you so much, Nick. Thank you. We've got time for some questions now. There was a lot of love in the chat for the Martin Gardner quote. And also, as soon as you mentioned ZPD, there was love for that as well. Don't know if you were expecting that.
That's great.
So just to go through a few questions here. So one of the things you highlighted in both Snakebird, Math, and Boo when you were showing it is that kids will often go into a game and just like play around with it. And you show with Boo that it's fun, even if you're not solving the puzzle, to just mess around and see what happens. How important do you think that is for these games and bringing these games to kids?
My initial instinct is like it depends on what lens I'm answering for. How important is it to make a successful commercial consumer game versus like how important is it for the learning process? I'll start with the learning process, and I'd say like it's absolutely critical. I remember when one of my sons, he needed his physical therapist was like, honestly, the best physical therapy you can do is take him to the playground. And I think that's a wonderful metaphor for just like trying, and exploring and all of that. And I think the unstructured play is important, but what's so great about a game is like it's almost like a manipulative in the learning world where it's like, okay, I can play around with this thing, but at least like the game has a right answer and like a kind of a structure and all that. I think on the other lens of like the kind of successful, game venture type thinking, I think there are lots of successful, like if I think of something like Mario Maker, like the level making stuff for Mario, like that's more of the play open space, and then versus like just kind of, but I don't know, even in a game like Mario, you can go backwards, you could still mess around and all of that. So I like that stuff, like when you can kind of sit in a game and kind of mess around, but I do think it kind of depends on the game.
Cool, thank you. We've had a question in the chat as well from Coco. I'm gonna mess your name up every time I say it. Coco Baboni, which is the question for you is, what is your stance on tutorials within Thinky games and games in general?
I have lots of thoughts. I don't want to say it depends on the game, but I'll try to give some more sweeping, generalized, opinionated advice that'll probably not be right. But I think in general, I'll say it actually in an edgy way. If tutorials mean you didn't do a good job with intuitive design, tutorials
that
are
is controversial.
I love it. Are a crutch, right? And so as much I'm trying to be edgy here, like like I think as much as you can focus on intuitive design and guiding the user's eye and making it very clear, it's like, what's the thing that you are trying to drag from where to where? That's over one example, but like, I think that's really the thing to do. So I just want to say that first before I say like, yeah, tutorials I think are important. I think there's things that you want the student or user to be, the player to be thinking about, and there's things that you don't want them to be using their cognitive energy on. And so you can fast forward some of that or cheat on, so I think it's an art and science of like crafting that really smooth scaffolding. And sometimes you don't even want it to be smooth. Sometimes you deliberately want to like hit them hard and then cool off for a while or something. And it's a combination of so many factors in terms of game mechanics and the visual represent, like how it's playing out is like, there's so many things. So I think I'd say like to an indie developer, right? Like, your game. I mean, you should definitely play test the bejesus out of it, but it's like, you should probably be an expert in your game mechanics and your leveling, and like, yeah, and then have that be informed also by play testing to see like where the sticking points are, what's not intuitive. But again, I would just say like, okay, so users they're having a hard time figuring out that they need to use this button. Okay, do we need to make a tutorial or do we need to change the UX? Like that would be the question that I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I guess part of that comes down to what you define as a tutorial, because it maybe changing the UX is in a sense a kind of tutorial, like a more subtle one, a wordless one that guides the player more naturally without just like bashing them over the head with a big
absolutely. And that's something that the gaming world excels at, of having it. I mean, even like the like Call of Duty type experience where it's like, I mean, every first person game is like, oh, you need to crouch under this thing to get through it in the first 2 seconds, just so you know how to crouch, right? Like I wish that classrooms were that slick, but yeah, I totally agree. If you can make it immersive enough,
okay. So next question here is, What have been the biggest, because you're bringing play math to schools, what are some of the biggest challenges in bringing play math to schools and convincing teachers that this take on Thinky Games is a good one, and they should be thinking about it as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've worked at a number of companies that were more like core curriculum, digital curriculum, or like even like a supplemental curriculum, which is like in its more like, oh, schools can just get whatever they want, but they are still like designed to support the core curriculum for Common Core. Play math is half that. We do have direct instructions on fraction type games. We do have, Snakebird is a cool mathy game that gets in. Once you have the multiple snakes, it's kind of this like systems of equations thinking. Like we do have a lot of the like deliberate mathy stuff, and we'll be getting a lot more of that stuff too with indie developers and strategic partners and all that. But we also love the Thinky Puzzly stuff as well. And to the question, I think there are a lot of teachers that do understand that, okay, their kids really do need these skills and they struggle with them, and maybe they can teach some of the math theory, but the kids are really like they're not engaged. I mean, and so it is a tricky messaging piece between, this is ed tech in general, like between the kids, the teachers, the administrators, and the parents slash guardians. Like it's a whole ecosystem, and they're kind of different user personas. I think with the teachers, one of the things that we are working on is we're going to have lesson plans for all the games, and a lot of the lessons plans will even extend some of the games. Like Boo, we're playing with an activity where in Boo you're decoding a visual ghost to like make him look like that and figure out the sequences. But there's also a pretty like widely used math activity that they use like math fairs and competitions and stuff, where like you have this number and here's your stuff, like how do you get to the number and stuff. So we can do a lot of bridge building there and kind of beef up the academic rigor and just the math lookiness of the content. But I think also part of it is me doing talks like this to at least figure out like the messaging around like, look, this actually is really the critical stuff. And I think if you go and talk to many teachers who are frustrated with the latest, it's always, I know I'm old, like kids today, yada, yada. But like, I do think that kids today are in a very difficult and unprecedented position with all of the stuff that's happening with them. And like, I like to talk about like, how do we break that Gen Z stare, and like, how do we really get through to kids? And I think this stuff does it. Like, I can tell you that like Fridays are our biggest days, because we know that like we definitely like we'd have a lot of usage throughout the week, and we want to get more like in the classroom in instruction, but we also know that like this is a really high quality, thinky, high cognitive activity site. We don't have any of the junk games, we don't have any of the so we're doing well, but I think we have a very specific offering, and it is a challenging messaging piece.
Great, thank you. We also had, we've got time for one more question. We also had a question from Jagriff in the chat. Do you think there is an opportunity to extend play math ideas to higher age groups, higher levels of math?
I absolutely do. It's interesting, this play math, we spun out as a new org this summer. We have a lot of ambition. We are primarily, as a starting point, focused on elementary schools. And I think, probably there's a lot of middle school kids. And once you start getting into the Thinky Puzzly stuff, like it really does feel pretty universal. I like Snakebird Math. I think that's a fun game, and I like Keep stuff too. So I think it's a question for a later day. Yeah, we've toyed with the idea of like having a teacher or a parent section or something like that. But I think it's really much more the startup mentality of like, we want to have focus. We want to crush it on what we're doing to start and really like have the kind of tip of the spearhead into our market and focus there. But you are all more than welcome to play the games on playmat.org. They are free. There are no ads, and they're cool. And we will be adding many more shortly and for the next forever.
Great, thank you. And I'm sure if people are, if there's, I saw earlier in the chat there was a math teacher. They mentioned that they were a math teacher. So if the people are interested, from that perspective, I think your contact details are on the site as well, aren't they? So they can get in touch with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Contact.
Absolutely great, awesome. So that is all we have time for. Thank you so much, Nick. If you want to drop out of the call now, that's totally fine, and I'll wrap up with everybody else. So yeah, thank you once again.
My pleasure, Joe. Always good to talk soon.